A flat slab of basalt, black and grain-flecked, sits beneath the foundation stones of what was once the first temple in Jerusalem. The slab measures roughly 4 cubits across, just over 6 feet, and its surface is polished to a dull sheen by 3,000 years of dust settling into its pores. The edges are chamfered, cut deliberately, not broken. No tool mark is visible on the top face. Beneath it, the ground drops away into a shaft that no survey map has ever recorded. The shaft is not wide. A man could not lower himself through it without scraping his shoulders on both sides. The walls are limestone, fitted without mortar. Each block pressed flush against the next, with a precision that would require scaffolding, lighting, and weeks of measured labor. The shaft goes down, and down is where the Testament of Solomon says something was placed that was never meant to be found. Not a treasure, not a tomb, not a storage room for temple vessels, something that could not be allowed to move. In 659 CE, the Sixth Ecumenical Council convened in Constantinople under Emperor Constantine IV and issued a formal decree restricting circulation of texts attributed to Solomonic authorship outside ecclesiastical oversight. The decree, recorded in the Council's disciplinary canons as Canon 14, cited works that described mechanisms of binding and containment not reconcilable with divine ordinance. The Testament of Solomon was named directly. Possession of it by anyone outside the clergy was grounds for excommunication. The text was ordered destroyed across the Eastern Roman Empire. Monastic libraries in Alexandria, Antioch, and Caesarea were searched. Copies were burned. Scribes who had transcribed the Testament were identified by diocesan record and summoned for interrogation. 3 were exiled. 1 was imprisoned. The council did not explain why a text about a king building a temple with the help of commanded spirits required this level of enforcement. It did not need to. The decree stood for 900 years. In 1958, a team from the University of Michigan's Department of Near Eastern Studies, working under archaeologist Dr. Felix Corrigan, cataloged a shipment of papyrus fragments acquired from a private estate in Cairo. The estate had belonged to a family of Coptic archivists whose records traced back 11 generations to a monastic community in Wadi el Natrun. Among the fragments, most of which were tax receipts, property records, and personal correspondence dating to the 4th and 5th centuries, was a roll of papyrus labeled in Greek marginalia as Testament of Solomon, chapters 8 through 14. The papyrus was brittle. The ink had faded to a pale brown visible only at certain angles of light. Corrigan's team photographed the fragments under ultraviolet illumination and discovered text that did not correspond to any known surviving manuscript of the Testament. The photographs were catalogued, filed, and placed in a sealed archive box under the reference number UM-NI 1958-0047. They sat in a basement storage room on the Ann Arbor campus for 31 years. No one requested the box. No one opened it. The Testament of Solomon describes a sealed chamber beneath the Temple Mount. Not a storage room, not a cistern, not a treasury, a prison built for entities that cannot be seen, and it specifies exactly what keeps them contained. In the next several minutes, you'll see what the text says, what evidence shows, and why it was hidden. If ancient containment systems fascinate you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover what was removed from Scripture. But here's what makes this stranger. The papyrus fragments catalogued by Corrigan's team in 1958 were re-examined in 1989 by Dr. Helena Marshak, a philologist at the University of Chicago's Oriental Institute. Marshak had been working on a comparative study of Greek demonological texts when she came across a footnote in a 1974 bibliography by Dr. George McRae of Harvard Divinity School, a footnote that referenced unresolved papyrus materials of Solomonic provenance held at the Michigan Archive. Marshak tracked the footnote to Corrigan's original 1958 catalog entry, requested the fragments, and received them in January 1990. Over 14 months, Marshak transcribed the Greek text, working with a research assistant named David Kessler, a doctoral candidate in Hellenistic Greek. The transcription identified the fragments as a section of the Testament of Solomon that had been missing from every known manuscript variant, including the 15th century Codex Holcomensis held at the Bodleian Library in Oxford, the 16th century manuscript at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and the text used by Conrad Lockhart in his 1925 critical edition, published by J. C. Hinrichs Verlag in Leipzig. What Marshak found corresponded to what scholars had long suspected existed, based on structural gaps in the surviving manuscripts. A middle section of the Testament, detailing the construction of a subterranean structure beneath the temple. The text was written in Koine Greek, with Aramaic loanwords. Consistent with the linguistic profile of the full Testament, as analyzed by Chester Charlton McCown in his 1922 monograph for the University of California Press. Marshak published a preliminary transcription in the Oriental Institute's Occasional Papers series in 1991, volume 14, pages 37 through 49. The paper was 12 pages. It received no press coverage. It was not cited in any major academic review for 6 years. In 1997, Dr. Sarah Klugman of Brown University referenced the Marshak transcription in a footnote of an article published in the Journal of Biblical Literature. The footnote was 7 lines long. It did not describe the content of the recovered chapters. It simply noted their existence. And this is where it gets disturbing. What we're looking at breaks into 3 parts. The first part covers chapters 8 through 10 of the recovered text. In this section, Solomon describes a conversation with an entity he calls the Ornias, a figure who appears in other versions of the Testament, but whose dialogue here is longer and more specific. The Ornias tells Solomon that there are beings older than the demons he has already bound, beings that do not move through air or fire as demons do, but that occupy space inside the earth itself. They were present before the temple was built. They were present before the city was founded. They were present, the Ornias says, before the ground was ground. Solomon asks how they can be contained. The Ornias replies that they cannot be killed because they are not alive in any way Solomon would recognize. They do not eat, they do not sleep, they do not die. They can only be sealed. Chapter 9 describes Solomon ordering the cutting of a chamber beneath the temple's southeastern corner, dug to a depth of 200 cubits below the bedrock, lined with limestone fitted without mortar, and sealed with a single stone, cut from the quarried rock, unbroken, without crack or seam. Chapter 10 describes the transportation of the sealing stone. It was cut at night, it was moved on wooden rollers, no iron tool touched it. The text specifies this 3 times, as though the prohibition were not symbolic but procedural. Iron, it implies, would interfere with what the stone was meant to do. The second part covers chapters 11 and 12. Here, the text becomes architectural. Solomon describes the mechanism that keeps the chamber closed. He calls it the name set in stone. According to the text, the Tetragrammaton, the ineffable name of God, was inscribed on the underside of the sealing stone, facing downward, so that the name rested directly above the chamber's interior. The text specifies that the inscription was not carved on the surface, but pressed into the stone as a seal presses wax, meaning the letters were raised inward, embedded in the stone's structure, not visible from above. Solomon writes that the name functions as a boundary the entities cannot pass, because they are bound to the shape of the world, and the name reshapes what is beneath it. Chapter 12 describes the chamber's interior dimensions, 12 cubits in length, 8 cubits in width, and 6 cubits in height, and notes that the walls, floor, and ceiling were all cut from a single continuous excavation, not assembled from separate blocks. The chamber was carved, not built. The language is dense. It is not metaphorical. It reads like a technical specification written by someone who had seen the space and was recording what he saw. The third part covers chapters 13 and 14. Solomon records what happens when the seal is tested. He describes an attempt to lift the stone by a team of workers using wooden levers and hemp ropes. The text states that when the stone was raised the width of a hand, approximately 4 inches, the air inside the chamber was felt by the men standing nearest the opening. The text describes it as a wind that does not move. It was not a breeze. It was not a draft from a connected passage. It was a pressure, the text says, that pushed outward without displacement. 2 workers collapsed. Their eyes were open. Their bodies were rigid. Solomon ordered the stone replaced immediately. The text says, the stone settled back into position, as if it knew its place. Solomon then ordered the shaft above the chamber filled with rubble and compacted earth. The entrance was concealed. Chapter 14 closes with a single instruction. No record of the chamber's location was to be kept above ground. The only record was the text itself. And the text, Solomon writes, was to be given only to his son and successor. In 2004, geophysicists from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem conducted a ground-penetrating radar survey of the southeastern section of the Temple Mount platform. The survey was part of a broader geological assessment of subsurface stability in the Old City. It was led by Dr. Amos Ben-Tor, a senior researcher in the university's Institute of Earth Sciences, and funded by a grant from the Israel Science Foundation, grant number 847/03. The survey produced anomalous readings at a depth of approximately 90 meters below the surface, far deeper than any known archaeological structure in Jerusalem. The readings indicated a void space, a chamber, roughly 6 meters in length and 4 meters in width. No height measurement could be resolved from the radar data. The findings were published in a limited technical report, numbered HUJ GPR 2004-17, distributed only to participating institutions and the Israel Antiquities Authority. The report noted that the density readings around the void suggested a single intact stone slab directly above it, measuring approximately 2 meters in diameter, with no detectable seams or joints. The report did not reference the Testament of Solomon. It did not reference any ancient text. It did not reference any historical record. It simply recorded the anomaly and recommended further geophysical study using seismic refraction methods. No further study was conducted. No follow-up survey was approved. The report was not made publicly available. It remains in a restricted access file at the Hebrew University's Geology Department. Here's what the translators left out. In every standard published edition of the Testament of Solomon, from Conrad Luckhart's 1925 text to the widely cited translation by F.C. Conybeare, published in 1898 in the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, Volume 30, pages 119 to 134. A specific phrase from Chapter 11 is rendered as, Solomon placed the name upon the stone. The Greek word used in the recovered papyrus is not epitithemi, which means to place upon or to set on. The word is enekatanthen, a rare verbal form that appears in only 2 other known Greek texts, both of them technical manuals describing metalworking seals from the 1st century. Enekatanthen means to press inward or to sink into. The distinction matters. Placed upon implies an inscription on the surface, decoration, dedication, something visible and external. Pressed inward implies the name was embedded inside the stone itself, part of its structure, not resting on it, but integrated with it. The seal was not a label. It was a component. Every translator who has worked from the surviving manuscripts, none of which included the recovered chapters, has rendered the phrase as surface inscription. The papyrus fragments Marshak transcribed in 1991 contain the only known instance of the original verb. The correction has never been incorporated into any subsequent edition. The 2011 reissue of the Conybeare translation by Forgotten Books reproduces the 1898 rendering verbatim. The phrase remains, in every accessible version of the text available today, a surface inscription. The original word says otherwise. The suppression starts at the Council of Constantinople in 659 CE. Canon 14 ordered the Testament destroyed, After the council, Patriarch Macarios of Antioch authorized a series of confiscations across Syrian monasteries in 660 and 661. In 661, the Imperial Library in Constantinople removed its single complete copy of the Testament from the general catalogue and transferred it to a restricted collection accessible only by direct imperial decree. In 685, under Emperor Justinian II, a second decree extended the ban to all provincial libraries and parish holdings. In 869, the Eighth Ecumenical Council, also held in Constantinople, reaffirmed the prohibition, adding language that specifically condemned texts describing structures of confinement for incorporeal beings as heretical and corrupting to the faithful. In 1054, following the Great Schism, the restriction passed into both Eastern and Western canonical law. In 1215, the Fourth Council of the Lateran, convened under Pope Innocent III, included the Testament on a list of forbidden works circulated to all Latin Church bishops with instructions for seizure and destruction. In 1559, Pope Paul IV placed the Testament on the first edition of the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, where it remained through 32 subsequent revisions and reprintings until the index itself was abolished by Pope Paul VI in 1966. For over 900 years, the Testament of Solomon was officially banned by the largest religious institution in Europe. It was not banned for theological error. It was not banned for doctrinal deviation. It was banned, according to the language of the councils themselves, for describing mechanisms of containment, structures, not parables, structures, not teachings, structures that implied something physical had been sealed in the earth and that the text knew where it was. Now, here's where it gets active. In March 2019, a research team from Tel Aviv University's Department of Archaeology and Ancient Near Eastern Cultures submitted a formal request to the Israel Antiquities Authority for a permit to conduct a targeted seismic refraction survey of the southeastern Temple Mount platform, the same area where the 2004 ground-penetrating radar survey had detected the subsurface anomaly. The request was filed by Dr. Rivka Aronson, a senior lecturer in geoarchaeology with 17 years of field experience in Jerusalem. The proposed methodology was non-invasive: no drilling, no excavation, no physical contact with the site. The permit was denied in November 2019. The denial, issued under the authority of the Antiquities Authority's Excavation Review Board, cited structural sensitivity of the site and lack of sufficient scholarly consensus to justify additional survey methodology at this time. Aronson appealed the decision in December 2019. The appeal was reviewed and denied in February 2020. No expanded rationale was provided beyond the original statement. In April 2022, Aronson's team submitted a second request, this time proposing only passive gravimetric measurement, the most non-invasive subsurface detection method available, requiring no surface contact whatsoever and producing no vibration. This request was also denied. The denial letter, dated September 14, 2022, contained a paragraph that had not appeared in any previous correspondence. The paragraph stated that certain subsurface anomalies beneath the Temple Mount platform have been designated as non-investigable under current administrative policy. The phrase non-investigable does not appear in any published antiquities regulation. It does not correspond to any known administrative category in Israeli archaeological law. It does not appear in the Antiquities Authority's published procedural guidelines. It appears only in that letter. Aronson filed a Freedom of Information request for the administrative basis of the designation in October 2022. The request was acknowledged. No documents were produced. As of the date of this recording, no response has been received. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying there is a functioning supernatural prison beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. I'm not saying invisible entities are real and currently contained under a basalt slab. I'm not saying the world is one cracked stone away from something breaking loose. I'm not saying any of that. But what the text describes, when you look at it carefully, matches a set of physical details that show up in a ground-penetrating radar survey conducted by a real university in 2004, a void at a specific depth, a single intact stone above it, dimensions that correspond, a location that aligns. The text is not a parable about a creature. It is a construction document. Depth, material, dimensions, mechanism of closure, procedure for testing, and the construction document corresponds to something that is physically there, detected by instruments, recorded in a numbered report, and filed away. What we have to confront is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If the Testament of Solomon describes a sealed chamber with specific dimensions at a specific location, and a radar survey conducted by the Hebrew University of Jerusalem detects a void with matching dimensions at that location, that is not coincidence. That is documentation. If the text describes a single unbroken stone as the seal, and the radar survey detects a single intact stone slab above the void with no detectable seams, that is not imagination. That is a construction record. If the text specifies a depth of 200 cubits, and the anomaly appears at approximately 90 meters, which falls within the standard margin of error for ancient cubit to meter conversion, using the royal cubit of approximately 45 centimeters, that is not allegory, that is measurement. If the text was banned for 900 years by multiple councils and emperors using language that specifically referenced mechanisms of containment, and a modern research permit to investigate the site it describes is denied 3 times with the phrase non-investigable appearing for the first time in the final denial letter, that is not superstition. That is a pattern. The Testament of Solomon is not a parable. It is a report. It describes what was built, where it was built, how deep it was built, what seals it, what happens when the seal is disturbed, and where the only record of its location was kept. And the ground beneath Jerusalem appears to contain exactly what the report says it contains. The basalt slab sits beneath the foundation stones of what was once the first temple, black, grain-flecked, chamfered at the edges. It is still there, still sealed, still pressing down on whatever was placed below it, exactly the way Solomon said it would.